I'm very excited to introduce you to our SIG2 Second Language Learning and Bilingualism presenter, which is Ana Rodriguez Gallego, who is joining us from University of Illinois, Chicago.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here today. My first time at NIU, so I'm very excited to be here, and thank you, Mandy, for the invitation. So today I will be presenting this research project along with my collaborators, Mandy here, and also Dr. Karen Morgan-Short. And the title of her project is Grammatical Gender Agreement in Spanish, Longitudinal Insights into Receptive and Productive Abilities Among Intermediate Learners. So we know that learning a second or additional language in adulthood is a dynamic process. It evolves, and that is why longitudinal work is so important, because it gives us valuable insights into how these change over time. It is also a variable process, not only between individuals, but also within individuals across different linguistic skills and domains, structures, and modalities. And to explain this dynamic and variable process, recent research is starting to examine individual differences, which include both affective abilities, such as motivation or foreign language anxiety, and cognitive abilities that include, for example, inhibitory control or language aptitude and working memory, which will be our focus today. So working memory is defined as the mechanism responsible for temporarily storing and processing a small amount of information, for example, the digits of a phone number or the ingredients of a recipe, while also executing cognitive tasks. Previous research has shown that working memory has a robust positive association with second or additional language learning, showing a larger role for production than reception. So today for our study, we're going to review studies that focus on working memory and which have examined this cognitive ability using complex span tasks, which include both a processing and storage component, in opposition with just simple span tasks that only include the storage component. We are also going to review studies with longitudinal designs, which examine development over time. And regarding our linguistics task, we're going to focus on studies that target receptive and or productive abilities. And by that, we mean for receptive, we talk about tasks where the target form is contained within the stimuli. For example, judgment task, interpretation, or processing tasks. And for productive, we'll include tasks where the participant provides the target form. So for example, selecting from a multiple choice list or providing the target form either orally or written. So let's start reviewing those studies that examine working memory and receptive L2A learning over time. We find a mixed role for working memory on the development of these L2A abilities longitudinally for receptive tasks. Some studies found a positive association, in this case for study abroad learners and implicit laboratory learners, on tasks such as eye tracking, ERP, or interpretation and judgment. And some other studies found no association, this time for classroom or explicit laboratory learners, again in a different set of tasks such as ERP, eye tracking, but also picture matching or lexical decision tasks. So as we see, evidence is mixed, but we only have 5 studies that have examined this, so we cannot get to any definitive conclusions. A similar situation we have for a productive learning. As a reminder, the participant provides the target form in these productive skills. We also find a mixed role for working memory. This time it seems a little bit more positive than for receptive, but all the studies that found this positive association for working memory in production examine classroom and beginner learners. And the only study that examined intermediate or advanced learners found no association. So again, very limited research, and this is even more homogeneous than receptive. We only have classroom learners, and none of these studies included any meaning-focused or communicative tasks. Regarding the linguistic form, today we're going to focus on grammatical gender agreement, which is a morphosyntactic form that is present in L2A Spanish, but it's absent in the L1 English, and it is a two-gender system, so it has masculine and feminine nouns, where articles, adjectives agree with the noun. We see a lot of variability learning this linguistic form. It is difficult for learners to acquire, and we see errors even among advanced and experienced learners. And as I mentioned before, no previous work has examined the association between working memory and grammatical gender agreement over time. So, because of this, our motivation for the study is to explore the role of individual differences in working memory capacity in L2A grammatical gender agreement acquisition, examining both receptive and productive abilities. Our first research question examines whether working memory predicts L2A receptive abilities, and our second research question is the same but for productive abilities. So to address this research question, we conducted a study with 36 participants. For all of them, English was their first language, and they were learning Spanish as a second or additional language. These participants were divided into groups. 15 of them were part of a study abroad program in Spanish-speaking countries, and 21 were studying at their home university here. All of them were enrolled in at least one university-level Spanish course, which was 5th semester level or above, so this is intermediate or advanced Spanish. And none of them had significant immersion experience prior to beginning the study, and they were all college students, so the mean was around 20 years old. Data collection took place at UIC in Chicago by a study designed by Mandy here. Participants came in for a cognitive session before the semester started, and they also completed a language session also before the semester. Then they had the semester either abroad or at home, and then they completed another language session. Today we're gonna focus on working memory as our cognitive variable, and both receptive and productive abilities pre-semester and post-semester. To assess working memory, this was pre-semester cognitive session. We used 3 tasks. 2 of them are linguistics working memory task, which is an operation span and a reading span task, and 1 non-linguistic, which is asymmetry span. So for the operation span, participants have to solve simple math problems and then remember a letter after a set of trials. For the reading span task, they read a sentence, have to determine whether it's logical or not, and then also remember a letter after a set of trials. And for the symmetry span, they make symmetry judgments, and then they had to remember the location of a square in a grid. And for the analysis, we calculated the composite score for the overall performance on all these 3 tasks. For our receptive task, we used a acceptability judgment task, an AJT, where participants read a sentence. This was presented 1 word at a time because we were also collecting EEG data. So then after they saw the last word, they had to provide a judgment. They had to determine whether the sentence was good or bad. It's like grammatical or ungrammatical. And this was for adjectives and articles, masculine and feminine nouns, because we're targeting grammatical gender. And for the analysis, we calculated their judgment accuracy. For our productive task, we use a kitchen task information gap activity to determine participant accuracy in producing the target structure. So participants received a picture of a kitchen with 12 items, and the researcher had the same kitchen, like a blank kitchen, with those loose items of various sizes and colors, and then participants describes the items and locations to the researcher. The score was based on suppliance of gender-matched adjectives and articles in obligatory context. So it looks something like this. You can see here the kitchen and the different items, and this is a communicative activity where learners negotiate meaning. For the analysis, we conducted a series of logistic mixed effects models. Our key predictors were working memory, session 1 and 2, our linguistic form, either articles or adjectives, gender, masculine or feminine, and group, which was a study abroad or at home. And group was a covariate because we saw that there were no difference between the at home and the study abroad group. and we calculated the main effects of these predictors and their possible interactions. So let's see our results. For working memory, we see that participants perform reasonably well in the operation span and the reading span. For the symmetry span, performance was a little lower, and then we see that the 3 tasks show variability, which is what we're looking for because we see a lot of variation here. And then let's focus on our first research question. So let's see our descriptive results for the AJT for our receptive tasks. So overall, we see that participants perform slightly better at session 2 compared to session 1, and this was generally held for both grammatical gender, so you see here for masculine and feminine, and also for linguistic form. To answer our research question, does working memory predict L2A receptive abilities for Spanish grammatical gender over time? We see a significant effect for linguistic form. Participants are likely to be more accurate for articles than for adjectives. And we also saw a significant interaction between working memory and linguistic form. So on the x-axis, you can see our 2 forms, article and adjectives, and we have accuracy on the y. And we see that for learners with higher working memory capacity, they're more likely to be accurate in articles than adjectives, but no difference was shown for learners with lower working memory capacity. For our productive task, we see a similar situation that for receptive, participants perform in general better at session 2 than at session 1. Although this time we see like they perform better in masculine than in feminine. You see like much lower accuracy for feminine, both for articles and adjectives. And to answer our second research question, does working memory predict L2A productive learning of L2 Spanish grammatical gender agreement over time? We saw a main effect of session. So as we saw before, participants perform better in session 2 than in session 1, as was expected. We also see a significant effect for gender, where participants are likely to perform better at masculine than in feminine. And also for linguistic form, as we saw in receptive, they are more accurate in articles than adjectives. And finally, we saw a significant interaction between linguistic form and gender, where learners are more likely to be accurate in masculine articles, like the difference between the adjectives is 18 times higher than for articles. Okay, so let's interpret these results. For research question 1, we saw, as a reminder, significant effect for linguistic forms, so they are more accurate in articles than adjectives, and also this interaction between working memory and linguistic form. So learners with higher working memory capacity will perform better in articles than adjectives. But we did not see an association between working memory and receptive abilities over time. In relation to previous research, this is consistent with some of those previous studies that also did not find an association. And for our second research question, significant effect of session, gender, linguistic form, and that significant interaction between gender and linguistic form. But again, we didn't see that association between working memory and production over time. So let's see how this is related to previous research. It's kind of inconsistent. As a reminder, some of previous studies found that positive association, although it was for beginner learners. So ours are intermediate to advanced, and the only study that investigated intermediate learners found a negative association, and we found no association at all. So it's kind of inconsistent. Our hypothesis is that maybe working memory plays a role at lower levels of proficiency, but when learners get more advanced, it doesn't play a role anymore. But we don't know. We have some limitations, as always in studies. We don't have enough power. We have a small-ish sample size, and it's only with college students. So hopefully, ideally, we could have a bigger sample size. And the format of the acceptability judgment task, it's not really natural because they are seeing one word at a time instead of the full sentence at once. And this is because of the EEG data collection. And although this is not fully natural, previous research has shown that this should not impact comprehension. To address this limitation, we could incorporate other measures of receptive abilities. So to conclude, in this study, we explore variability in L2A learning. We try to increase the explanatory power of this variability by using a longitudinal design among intermediate learners, so filling one of the gaps because most of the research has been conducted with beginner learners and there's not a lot of longitudinal designs in the literature. We also tried to examine multiple linguistic skills that target the same form, while previous research either examines receptive or productive. Here we wanted to examine both at the same time. And in this project, we advocate for the use of communicative production tasks. They don't have to be daunting, they can yield quantifiable and very valuable data. And to end, we just emphasize the need to keep investigating the role of working memory with longitudinal designs to see which role cognitive abilities play in second language learning over time. Thank you. So working memory was only measured once, like at point 1, but we measured gender agreement both at point 1 and at point 2. So we were trying to see if working memory predict how they got better.
So growth.
Yeah, growth. Like learning gains. So she asked why working memory could facilitate learning of gender agreement in particular, right? Gender agreement in Spanish, so nouns are either feminine or masculine, and that's arbitrary. So like, I don't know, table is feminine, but then microphone is masculine. So we assume that learners need to hold that information in their short-term working memory, because then when an adjective comes to the small table, they need to remember, okay, table is feminine, then I need the agreement for the adjective to be feminine. So that is why we're thinking maybe at lower stages, they need to hold that information versus, because they need to think like, okay, is table feminine or masculine? Versus like when they are more advanced, like that's a more automatic process and they're like, they don't need to rely on their working memory as much and they may need to rely on other abilities. Okay, so the question was, if learners have other L1s or L2s, like any additional language, which include gender, grammatical gender, and in some languages it might be the same as Spanish, so table might be feminine as well, but it could be different, or there's languages that have like 3 genders. If they have an additional language that has a different grammatical gender agreement, working memory could probably play a bigger role because they would need to remember, okay, in my first or second language is this gender, but in this other, versus like for learners who don't have like any other language, it's like, okay, I just learned table, it's feminine, I don't need, like it's not competing. Most of our studies, they only include college students, and it's like a very small set of the population. Usually they have higher working memory. I probably could think the results could be different. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.